Welcome everybody to another amazing episode of Wellness Warriors. Today I have a fellow doctor slash former chiropractor, and he's got a list of all kinds of fellowships and certifications. He's certified in anti-aging medicine, regenerative and functional medicine, board certified integrative cancer therapy, certified in epigenetic clinical methylation and nutrigenomics, which you all know that I love this. Kinesiologist with emphasis on botanical medicine and homeopathy. Dr. Kevin Connor is the clinic director at Connor Clinic in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, I grew up in Winnipeg, so
oh, great.
We understand the weather. I now live in Florida, so.
You're one of the wise ones that moved out of this, right?
That's right. Well, I'm very excited to have you on here. I looked at your website and I looked at some of the videos that you had, and I was very intrigued with the work that you're doing, and definitely will use you as a resource because we always have clients all over the United States and the world really that are looking for doctors like you that can support them through their healing journey. So tell us, why cancer? I mean, you started off as a chiropractor, and then here you are, working with cancer patients and a few Lyme patients as well. So what happened there?
Well, it was an experience. So I graduated as a chiropractor, but really practiced as a functional medicine practitioner before that term existed, taking care of people with thyroid issues and hormonal problems and adrenal function and things. I always studied about Rife technology. So Rife is a light frequency generator. And for some reason I was enthralled with that technology, and even had my machine picked out that I wanted to buy at some time. But all I knew about it was it was for cancer. So I wasn't seeing cancer patients at the time. And then in the late 1990s, one of my patients came in and she told me she was diagnosed with breast cancer in both breasts and was given 3 months to live, and did not want to do chemo or radiation. So she literally said, if you can't help me, I'd rather die. And that's when I knew I should buy a Rife machine and give this thing a shot. Well, she lived another 13 years and died of a heart attack. So it was in that process that God really opened the door and pushed me through, and really revealed to me what I was supposed to be doing. So I loved chiropractic. I loved taking care of people, but I knew there was just something missing that I was supposed to do. Matter of fact, I graduated in 1986 and just felt that missing something for a number of years. So I ended up selling my practice, and my wife and at that time 4 children went into full-time missionary work. We worked down in Mexico at a mission Bible school orphanage. Wow. And God closed the door on that, put me back in practice. I just didn't know what it was to do, I was supposed to be doing, until Shar came along. And that's really launched my my newfound practice in taking care of people with cancer. So that's how it started.
Okay, interesting. So explain to our audience what a Rife machine is and what it does and how it could be beneficial for people with cancer or any disease for that matter.
Well, a Rife machine is named after its original founder, Royal Rife. It's a light frequency generator. So it uses light frequencies at specific frequencies to help destroy pathogens. That was the idea. From a quantum physics perspective, everything down to its smallest particle is a frequency. It's energy that's vibrating at a frequency. That's what quantum physics tells us. And Rife theorized, well, if you could hit cancer cells with their own frequency, could you break them apart? Could you cause lysis of the cell? And that's what his experimentations involved. He found some success. He was, this was back in the 30s and 40s, early 50s. University of, I think it was Southern California School of Medicine sent him some cancer patients. He had success with them. He actually won a lot of awards, but unfortunately in the early 50s, that's when the American Medical Association was just going after anybody that wasn't using pharmaceuticals. And he was put out of business, and he literally just gave up the ghost and quit. His information was lost for a number of years. And then it was in the 1970s when it was picked up again. Some of his old writings were found. Some of his old videos were found. You could search for them on YouTube. And some of that technology was put back together to use. So the early machine that I used on that patient, back in the 90s, it wasn't nearly as powerful as the machines that we have now. With the Freedom of Information Act, it turned out that the United States government, after they stole all Rife's technology, tried to use it to actually create disease. So if you could hit somebody with the anthrax virus frequency, could you cause anthrax virus? And could we use this in germ warfare? And could we use this against the Soviets? Well, it doesn't work that way. If you hit somebody with the anthrax virus and they don't have anthrax, it's not going to do anything at all to them. If they did have anthrax, it would do nothing but to help stimulate an immune response against that anthrax and help the person. So it doesn't cause disease, so it didn't serve the military. And with the Freedom of Information Act, all that became public to people like me when they spent millions of dollars of our taxpayer money to map out all those frequencies. So it became, a blessing in disguise, and it's been able to help a lot of people. So Rife technology, bottom line, is using light frequencies to help stimulate the body's immune system to fight back against a disease.
Okay, so when you say light frequency, are you referring to like visible light that we see, or is it electromagnetic frequencies?
Well, visible light is in the electromagnetic spectrum. Okay. So it is, we are using a bulb, what's called a Tesla tube, which is a gas-filled bulb. Okay. So there's a lot of Rife machines. You could Google Rife machines, and there's some $300 Rife machines that are using electrodes. That's not really Rife technology. It still might be using frequencies. An electric stim that your chiropractor or your physical therapist is using electrical frequencies to help stimulate muscle contraction or relaxation or decrease inflammation. That's one use of frequencies. But in this, we're using a different spectrum, using a light. It's going through a bulb, through a gas-filled tube. That makes a difference. And it's the frequency that you're using that makes all the difference. So if let's say breast cancer, there's certain frequencies that have been found that breast cancer can vibrate at. So there's maybe 100. So there's a lot of frequencies. So you can run those frequencies. If a person has breast cancer, you can run those frequencies that can help stimulate an immune response against those cells that can possibly cause lysis of those cells. It certainly causes vibration of those cells, which will help your body recognize them as the enemy. And that's part of the problem with fighting cancer, is that these are your own cells that are in rapid replication, and your body isn't supposed to kill its own cells. So if you can get the body to recognize it as something other than a normal cell, then if a person has a healthy immune response, they have a better chance of battling it themselves.
Interesting. Now, if you were to recommend a machine for somebody to use at home, or is it better for them to go to a clinic like yours? What kind of machine do you recommend?
Well, interesting, because when we first started out, I graduated as a doctor. So people come to me, they pay for a visit, and I do something, and then they leave. So that's actually how we ran our clinic with patients that had cancer as well. So they'd come to us, we would do an hour, 2 hour, 3 hours of the Rife on them, and then they would go home, and they'd come back if they were in a pretty acute state of their cancer. They might come back every day and do that. So it really limited us to be able to only treat local patients. And it wasn't until we had one patient that this is years ago, he was given 2 weeks to live by Mayo. We were in Minnesota, so Mayo Clinic is near us. Mayo gave him 2 weeks to live. It's kind of an interesting story because his son lived in California, flew back to, after a few days of hearing this, flew back to be with his dad the last couple of weeks and to prepare for his death and such. So this gentleman came into us. His wife heard about us. He was extremely indifferent. He's like, hey, my wife just told me to come here. I'll come here and do this. We started treating him daily in the office.
What kind of cancer did he have?
He had pancreatic cancer that had spread to the esophagus and the stomach, I believe.
Wow.
He was in pretty bad shape. He was pretty gray looking. He was not real healthy. But he was very compliant. He was just very indifferent. He didn't even want to know what we were doing. Just do it. My wife told me to come here. And he was there all week long. And he said, oh, I'm not going to be here next week because my son is coming in town and we're going to go hunting, And he was actually looking a little bit pinker by the end of the week. And it was like, what? When he said that, I'm like, what? I'm like, Lord, why did you send me this guy? And now he's okay. All right, maybe you just sent him so he'd have one last hunting trip with his son and he'd be healthy. And I was quite positive I wasn't going to see him again. And but then after being gone that week, he comes in the next week. Okay, I'm back. And he just kept going and going and going. And about 2 years into his care, okay, he was still going well, and he was down to a couple times a week he was coming in or something. He said, oh, do you have a clinic in I forgot what sunny place in California? And I said, no. And he goes, because we just sold our house and we're moving to our place in this California. And it was like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? And literally it was one of those prayerful aha moments for me, because as I prayed about what am I supposed to do with this guy, he's done so well. He's supposed to be dead 2 years ago. And literally there's one of those, God said, well, what would you do if you had cancer? Well, I'd bring one of these home and use it every night. And I was like, well, why aren't you doing that with everybody? So I literally came to the office the next day and said, we're changing our whole plans. We're not having people do it in the office anymore. Everybody's going home with a Rife. That's the right thing to do.
Okay.
Turns out it's cheaper for people than having to come into my office and pay for an office visit every day. So that's what we did. And that was 8 years ago or something. And so all of our patients go home with a Rife machine and do it at home. That's probably the biggest thing that makes us different from like the Mexico cancer clinics and such, is that I don't believe you're going to be healed from cancer in 3 weeks of doing detox therapies or something. Right. I think it's a lifestyle change. Right. I think there are certain things that you could do forever, and it'd be highly beneficial for you to stay doing those things. I think the Rife is one of them. It's not a magic wand that's going to heal everybody, but it can certainly stimulate an immune reaction to a disease, and that's where I think it shines.
Awesome. So what is the machine that you use and recommend for your patients?
So we use the True Rife, but we also use the GB4000. So we use both of those. We typically, if a person comes to us and already has a GB4000, we'll work with them with that. If they don't have a Rife already, we'll use the True Rife. It's the easiest one to program, and it's the easiest one to use. So and I think it's a little hardier as far as its longevity. I use one at home that's 8 years old. I have not had a problem with it. So they last a long time. They're hardy machines, and they're really good. Those are the only two that we use. So some people come and say, I use this one. I've used other ones in the past. I've settled on these two because I think they're the most powerful, the most beneficial, the most functional, the most programmable. And the key to a Rife is if you're not running the right program, it's completely worthless if you're trying to do something. If I have a bacterial infection, I'm running viral programs, it is not going to do anything for the bacterial infection.
Right.
And same thing with a cancer. If I have a squamous cell cancer and I'm running some other type cell cancer program, it's not going to help. So it's very specific to the frequency. So programming is essential.
And it comes with instructions, so a layperson can learn how to use it.
Yeah. So we have patients that call us and go, I can't afford to come to you. I can't afford to use your services, but I think I could borrow somebody's Rife. Yeah, you could use it on your own. You could buy one right from the company. I'm not saying people need us. You could, if you're going to buy a Rife, I would highly suggest you only buy one of those two. That's just my opinion. It's not to bash any other company. It's just I've used other ones, and that's my opinion. And you can certainly use it on your own and get instruction from the purchaser for the company, or we could help you as well.
Okay, so True Rife or the GB 4000.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Now, let's switch gears a little bit, because another one of your specialties is methylation, genetics, epigenetics, nutrigenomics. And my audience certainly knows all about that, because one of the big aha moments I had in my healing journey was my homocysteine was at 21. And I'm like, what is this? Like, I'm a heart attack waiting to happen. I had no idea what homocysteine even was. So that led me down the path of understanding the whole methylation process, did DNA testing, MTHFR, blah, 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 GST, glutathione, vitamin D problems, you name it, I had it. So I had the perfect storm for creating breast cancer. So tell me how you use genetic testing in your practice and how you apply that with patients with cancer, and why that's so important.
Well, let's start by saying I don't think that there's very many cancers. According to any reputable information, maybe 5% of cancer really is caused by a genetic problem. Right. But your genes do factor into a lot of things. So the first thing that people think of when they think of genetics and cancer, if they've stayed up on any knowledge, is typically tumor suppressor genes. So you have a certain fail-safe method in your body, in your cells, to help if a cell goes into rapid replication. So what cancer is one cell going into rapid replication for some reason, a myriad of possible causes, and that cell just starts to replicate, and those cells replicate. That's what cancer is. So most people understand that everybody has cancer, and by that definition is we all have cells that do that. But then we have tumor suppressor genes that should sense that, kick in, and cause that cell to go through, stimulates certain processes called capsases that stimulate apoptosis and cause cell death. So cell have that protective measure in your genes called a tumor suppressor gene that should kick in and cause cancer cells to die. So if I have defects in tumor suppressor genes, that can hinder that fail-safe method. Knowing that would be helpful because there are known things that you can do to help stimulate increase in tumor suppressor gene function. So, and that's well documented in the literature. I'll give you an example of that's one of the benefits of curcumin, the active ingredient of turmeric, is it's been proven to increase the p53 tumor suppressor gene system. So even if I have defects, which we all do have some defects, but even if I have gross defects in my p53, my tumor suppressor gene, main tumor suppressor gene system, if I'm taking curcumin, that can help that function a little bit better. So knowing my genes prior to getting a serious disease can be helpful because I can take nutritional changes, make dietary changes based upon those genes and help prevent disease. And likewise, if I already have a disease, I have cancer, why should I look at my genes? Well, same thing with tumor suppressor genes, but there's multiple other gene pathways that are as valuable to look at. How are my detoxification pathways? How are my growth pathways? Am I stimulating KROS production, which is stimulating growth production, because of these defects I have? So maybe I should be off of dairy, or I should be off of it. So it can guide our dietary choices, and it can certainly guide our specific nutritional things that pathways that you may want to support, based upon defects that we all have. So it doesn't mean you're going to get a disease because you have a defect. It doesn't mean that you're treating that genetic defect, because you can't. You're not going to make a change in that gene. But knowing that I have defects in that pathway can help me make wise decisions, and help me overcome disease or prevent it.
Excellent. Excellent. Now, what are your, well, let's talk about breast cancer specific. Are there specific genes that you have seen that are involved typically in the development of breast cancer, other than, the BRCA gene, which I'd like to ask you about also, because we say BRCA and everybody freaks out, but they don't realize it's a tumor suppressor gene. It's a good gene, and why does it mutate? It doesn't, it's not always genetic. So let's address that. Breast cancer specifically.
So breast cancer specifically, there are certain genes that you want to look for breast cancer. Certainly the BRCA genes are just one. Those are tumor suppressor genes, not just in breast cancer, but any hormonally driven cancers. And what people struggle with the BRCA genes is that typically if they go through their oncologist, they're only going to check 2, 3, 4, 5 of the main BRCA genes, where there's dozens and dozens of BRCA genes.
Wow.
And most people will have multiple defects on their BRCA genes, and that's just can be very normal. So you have to be careful to calm a person when you go over their genes, because a person can be stuck in thinking that if I have a defect, I'm going to get a disease.
Right.
That's not true. So, but you definitely look at the BRCA genes with any type of hormonally driven cancer. And then you have to be looking at detoxification pathway genes. And maybe even more important than the tumor suppressor genes, it's that detoxification pathway genes. And not just breast cancer, but most cancers, because it is something had to get inside the cell to cause that rapid replication in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Could it be a virus? Well, yes, it could be that it's really not going to be affected by the or the detoxification pathway genes, but more often than not, it's some sort of toxic chemical that we're exposed to. Hence, the rise in cancers across the world in the last 50 years, because the rise in chemical use, and how that correlates. So it's the slowing of our detox pathways because of defects that is probably our biggest genetic cause of cancer, though it's indirect.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. Now, what kind of genetic testing do you use? Do you have a specific company, or do you have your own?
It's not our own, but it is a company that we use that is only through professionals, and it's through, I believe it's through Rutgers University, and it's one that tests for the most amount of gene SNPs. We used to use 23andMe. We stopped using them because a couple of years ago they cut their SNPs that they were testing for in order to make their test less expensive, though they didn't pass on that cheaper expense to the consumer. It made their company more profitable, you should say. But they cut out a lot of the SNPs that were valuable to practitioners. They saved the SNPs that were more ancestral orientated to compete with, their main competitor. So we stopped using them. If a person does have a 23andMe test that does fit into our software still, but we're missing a lot of potential genes, the cost of the lab itself is pretty reasonable. I think it's about $200 for the lab to run a gene test. And then the software gives us a pretty hefty spit out of probably about 60, 70 pages of detail of the genes that we want to look at. And there's so many that, I created a kind of a video book called Cancer Genes, and it's free. You can watch it free on our website. But it's a series of, 40, 50 videos on going through a gene report and what you'd want to look for and how it correlate to not just cancer, but to other diseases and dysfunctions and struggles that people have. And we never, ever want to say that genes are the cause, because they aren't. It's the epigenetic factors that are the cause. But matter of fact, the truth is the epigenetic factors are what cause the mutations too. But certainly if a person has mutations, it can breed some problems. So if we can know that, I think it's just another piece of the puzzle that can help a person.
Excellent. Now, epigenetic factors, what are they?
Well, they're the same factors that any good functional doctor will talk about. It's just eating, healthy, because you want to limit exposure to toxins that can not only cause issues, but that can damage your genes. And one that most people don't want to talk about because it can land them in trouble is things like vaccinations and medications, those toxins that your body has to get rid of. We think, it's a medication, it's a miracle of science, and it can be, but it's still a chemical that your liver has to detoxify on a pathway. And in itself, we have no idea what that's going to do to our own gene pool. And if you still are having babies, you're going to pass on that defect to your baby. And we have no idea what that's going to do down the road a few generations. And that's what we're experiencing. Many people believe, just you mentioned the MTHFR gene defect. It's been studied, and many people would agree with that defect quite possibly was caused by synthetic folate put into our bread and our flour back in the 30s and 40s, and is still in our cereals today. Folic acid, which is synthetic methyl tetrahydrofolate, and that quite possibly has caused the MTHFR defect, which now causes a decrease in methyl product production for a lot of people.
Never thought of that piece, but that makes total sense, because you look at, the increase in that problem, and you look at, my generation or our generation, our parents grew up in the 30s, 40s, and I grew up in the 50s. And all that synthetic food and synthetic vitamins that were in the breads and cereals. Makes perfect sense. What other kinds of foods would be beneficial from an epigenetic point of view?
Beneficial for a cancer patient?
Yes.
Well, it's more so what foods are probably best to stay away from
Okay.
a genetic point of view. And certainly with any cancer, you're trying to limit growth. So then you look at what foods stimulate growth pathways, metabolic pathways. And the first one that you should probably consider is dairy products. So dairy, I wouldn't say dairy is necessarily a cause of cancer per se, but it certainly is a stimulant to growth factors. And you try to explain it to people, well, what is dairy for? It's milk for a baby, for a 60-pound cow to grow up to be a 1,200-pound cow. We certainly don't want to be adding growth factors. And I show in videos different the metabolic pathways to get them to understand that stimulates the KROS pathway, which is a growth pathway, to get them to understand the technical side of that. But staying away from things that will stimulate growth of the cancer. So then we talk about, from a dietary standpoint, cancer needs a fuel source. So whereas dairy is not necessarily a fuel source, it's a growth stimulator. But what is a fuel source of a cancer? It could be fed mainly directly through the pathway called glycolysis, which is how we break down glucose. So sugar should probably be something that all cancer patients should refrain from. But there are certain people that their cancer is stimulated completely off glycolysis, or that's the main source of fuel, we could say. And then there's other people that their cancer currently is fueled off of amino acid, gobbling up amino acids, and that is a fuel source, lysine and methionine and glutamine. So those people should limit animal products like meat. That should be the main thing that they limit. Not that they should be eating a bunch of carbohydrates, but they really have to limit protein sources, and typically it's animal protein sources, what we found. So it can vary. Some people really should be eating some animal proteins, and some people should not be eating any animal proteins. Probably every cancer across the board should stay away from dairy. Every cancer across the board should stay away from gross glucose, sugar, sucrose, has really no nutritional value. But some people don't need to stay away from fruit and vegetable juicing, which can be high in glucose breakdown, but has all these other nutritional values. And if their cancer isn't fed directly through glycolysis, that's where juicing can be very beneficial for those people. So it does vary from person to person, not so much cancer to cancer, but person to person on the fuel source of that cancer.
And you determine this through the DNA testing?
You could get hints through the DNA testing, yes. Dr. Gonzalez and Dr. William Kelly did questionnaire testing, metabolic testing, they called it. We do kinesiology testing as well to help determine that. A person not having any access to any of those things could look at how they feel after they eat those things. So if I juice, I don't feel as well when I'm juicing. Or if I don't eat some meat, I don't feel well at all. Those are some hints that you could gather for what is possibly, causing your cancer growth. Certainly, if you have a tumor that's visible and palpable, you can tell sometimes when what you're eating is adverse to the cancer. So there's different ways that you can tell what's currently feeding your cancer, but you want to try to cut off that pathway as much as possible.
Excellent information. Well, I could go on forever. I loved all this science geeky stuff. I think it's really helps us to get to the root cause of what cancer is. And what I educate our community on is you don't have to fear cancer once you understand what it is and what it's not. And we have all these tools available to us that can really allow the body to heal and recover from cancer. So thank you so much for everything that you do. And I understand that you have on your website, what's your website? It's
Connor's Clinic, CONNERS clinic.com.
And you have some free books that we can access there. I looked at them, some great information there. So thank you so much for everything that you do, Dr. Connors. I appreciate your time and your expertise. And I'm going to be in touch.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.